So dynamic pricing is setting the right price at the right time for the right customer.
How is Kingfisher using AI to gain better supply chain visibility?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it was one of our very early use cases where we proved out the use of artificial intelligence and deep analytics. Good question, and it's one of the things along with cybersecurity and a few other domains that keeps me awake genuinely. If you take that example of Codex, Visual Studio, and GitHub, you've got all sorts of bias and decisions being made on servers in the whatever data center they're sitting in. So it changes the job type. It changes what the person does. So you have to change. You've got to relearn. You've got to upskill yourself. You have to think about how work is changing.
Welcome to the AI Adoption Podcast. I'm your host, Professor Ashley Braganza, and it gives me great pleasure to welcome Chris Blatchford from Kingfisher. Chris, welcome to the podcast. Before we get started, could I ask you to introduce yourself and Kingfisher briefly?
Yeah, of course, Ashley. Great to be here. Thanks for inviting me on. So my name's Chris Blatchford. I'm the CTO for Kingfisher. So we're a European retailer. We've got around 2,000 stores across the UK and France, Poland, Portugal, and more recently Romania. We've got a large e-com business. We've got a big bricks and mortar operation, and we serve a lot of people's home improvement projects year on year. So thrilled to be here to talk to you a little bit about artificial intelligence and all things related.
Great. Chris, thank you so much. So Chris, what's Kingfisher doing strategically in AI?
There's a number of areas we're looking at. So when we think about AI, and it's a big amorphous term that is both in a hype bubble, but also is providing actual real tangible value. So we think about it in three ways. One is foundational. So in order to leverage artificial intelligence, you have to have a platform on which to run it. And so we have a platform called Nucleus, which is our data lake, and then we have a framework called Athena, which is both a large language model aggregator as well as serving proprietary models, including large language, for various use cases. So that foundational layer is critical. The second piece we have is customer-focused innovations. So you may or may not have seen on our B&Q or our Castorama France websites something called Lens or Hello Casto. So Hello Casto is our large language model-driven conversational bot to help customers find products. Lens is using visual search to identify SKUs or products, mainly for the DIY enthusiast, and other recommenders and personalisation algorithms driving our e-com experience overall. So that's our customer-focused piece. And then we have internal productivity. So this is where we look at automating manual process. So we're leaning into agentics and designing workflows around agentics to hand off workflows that will typically be done by humans. We're looking at analytics and prescriptive analytics, so things like supply chain visibility that allows us to, or our users to see where there's stock replenishment or stock gaps. It enables them to very rapidly fill and address those stock out issues. And then we have more colleague productivity using things like Microsoft Copilot or off-the-shelf artificial intelligence, which is harder to find or see the productivity gains, I think, on the P&L. But it does show significant benefit for well-being, actually, and helping colleagues get their day-to-day jobs done. So in short, foundational elements, how you build it, customer-focused innovations, and then internal productivity.
Great. Thank you. Because clearly with a retailer of your size and spread, the use of AI is really where you would expect to see lots of benefits. And you've talked about some of the areas. Perhaps we could look at some of the specific applications, some of the areas in a little more detail, Chris. Maybe starting at the customer end, because clearly that's where the experience really is. Could you give us a little more detail? I know you've mentioned a couple of them, but could you give us a little more detail around what Kingfisher is doing, particularly in terms of that customer interface?
Yeah, of course. So really, when we think about the customer experience, it's about providing access to products, so quickly enabling the customer to get to the product they need or they want. So that could be part of a project, a big DIY project. It could be a tradesperson with a very, very specific ask, or very, very specific idea of what they need. So they don't necessarily need a lot of supporting framework. So, for example, typical traditional Boolean search allows a user to search for a hammer drill, and that search will provide back results on hammer drill based on a number of query intent analysis. We're thinking about how we shift that to more semantic search, so conversational search. How do we infer customer intent, both from their query, but also from what we know about them and what we know about their prior search history, and any other contextual information we have. That could come from, as I say, prior purchases or search activity. It could come from a loyalty program. So what do we know about them? Which loyalty or promotions have they responded to in the past? And all of this is in service of trying to get the customer to the product they want, but also helping them understand what options they've got if they are looking at a big project, and inferring that intent to get an idea of what project or sort of focus the customer has is really, really important. So we can use things like conversational bots to tease out that intent. We can use visual search tools for tradespeople, perhaps more junior tradespeople that don't necessarily know the exact SKU or product they need. But personalization is really the key, and I think that is pervasive across not just the e-com experience, but we want that same AI augmented experience to persist in store as well. So whilst using, say, the DIY.com or the B&Q app in store, we want you to be able to get product information really, really quickly, or find the aisle that the product is sitting on really, really quickly. And there's all sorts of things you can use for that, from electronic shelf edge labeling to geolocation. But it's all rooted and anchored in personalization. And actually, if I look at the recommenders that we use, the recommender systems for e-com, last year we saw them provide around 10% of e-com sales. So it's one measure, it's an imperfect measure, but what it does tell us is that those recommenders are quite precise and are recommending the right products to the customers at the right times. And so we've got ambitions to try and grow that over 2026.
I mean, this notion of personalization is really important, because I know from my own personal experience, you go in because you want to kind of get something done in the house, and before you know it, you think, okay, I need this, but what else am I going to need to complete the job? Someone who's a professional would clearly have a better idea. So understanding what else is needed to kind of complete a particular job, are you able to, through AI, be able to give the customer that level of experience around, okay, you want to put up a picture frame, but it's more than just having a screwdriver. You need the whole bunch of stuff that goes around it. So is that the level at which we're talking?
Yes, and there's a few different facets to the use case you describe, I think, which is pretty exciting. So on the one hand, you can cluster SKUs and products by use case or by project, and you can do that with traditional search systems and e-com systems. So you don't need artificial intelligence for that, actually. It's a bit similar to like a call center, where you have your top 5 customer queries that come in. Where is my order? How do I return my order? What is the price of X? So there's a number of use cases that come into call centers, which you can automate using fairly rudimentary matching algorithms. You don't need artificial intelligence necessarily, and it's very, very similar for the product journey and the project journey online. You can cluster things like kitchen design or bathroom design, and we have tools in store to help customers design their kitchens and bathrooms using virtual reality or augmented reality. So they're very, very typical ones, and some of that is also driven by seasonality. So today it's 12 degrees, I think, or 15 degrees in London, which is about 10 degrees higher than it was last week. That's much to the surprise of many of us at B&Q and in retail. However, seasonality tends to drive a mutation in those clusters of products. So whilst we were selling heaters and products related to heaters or heating, that may well have changed this week. So that's where you start doing artificial intelligence, and when you start to need dynamic product clusters based on seasonality but other data streams. So it could be meteorological data. So we should be able to get ahead of that, because weather reports exist, and they allow us to get ahead of what we believe the impact of seasonality might be. But we can also bring in things like search engine trend data. So Google Trends, for example, you can bring in that trend data to understand what customers are looking for. You bring in social signals. So what's the biggest, or what's the most prominent or popular trend on TikTok? And that's one of only handful of social media platforms that I actually know. I'm getting too old for that. But when you start to build in all of these different signals, then you need to start thinking about how you dynamically analyze those signals and create models that recommend clusters or products based on those very dynamic and almost real-time signals. So that's what we're really focused on in particular next year, but right now, and that leads into things like dynamic pricing, dynamic ranging. It leads into stock availability, sort of digital order management, how we find that stock across all of our stores, all of our network. So it starts to get really complex and really interesting. It's actually a massive differentiator for us from a pricing or from a ranging point of view.
From a dynamic pricing point of view, and thinking about how one would go about doing that kind of pricing, could you expand on that a little bit? Just because a lot of people talk about dynamic pricing, but
Yeah.
what's it mean really?
So dynamic pricing is setting the right price at the right time for the right customer. And so it's comprised of sort of three main elements in my mind. You have product prices, so how we price products based on availability, promotions. So we apply promotions, price markdowns to reduce stock, or for customer loyalty, we will provide discounts, promos. So you've got your product list. You've then got your rules engine, which determines which prices you want to deploy when the price changes. It can be based on price indexing, be based on competition, inflation, macroeconomic indicators. So what's the right price, the right optimized price to give value to the customer, but also give value to Kingfisher? And then the third piece is more complex econometrics, which is where you get into the sort of mathematics of the products and the pricing. And that can get very complex, which is somewhat beyond me, and I leave to my very savvy data scientists. But that's really the secret sauce. So pricing, you can web scrape from anywhere. Rules engine, which is largely if then else, and sort of nested traditional queries. And then you get into the econometrics, which is much more sophisticated, prescriptive mathematics and analytics around how you do the right price, how you get the right price for the right product, how you cluster products in the right way, regionally where you push those prices to which customers, based on which promotion, based on seasonality. And that's very core to retail. How you price and range your stores and your availability online can make or break a week's trading. So, and you can sort of lift and shift that same thinking to ranging, so dynamic ranging. Again, you've got certain ranges based on seasonality, based on different indicators, different signals. You've got a rules engine which determines, based on stock availability, supply chain, which products are available and when. But then you get into the complex analytics, which will look at things like, what's the competition doing from Temu in China? What products are they starting to push through, and at what price point, and how do we respond to that from a ranging and a pricing point of view? So as the world becomes smaller and more competitive, because things like fulfillment times are being reduced, then we have to think much more broadly about range, about pricing, about choice, about speed. And thankfully, with our stores, the combination of the store network we have and the online presence, a lot of competitors can't beat our store availability, the availability we have, and the fulfillment speed we have based on our store locations. So it's a big competitive edge for us.
So Chris, for a retailer, making sure the products are on the shelf is really critical. How is Kingfisher using AI to gain better supply chain visibility?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it was one of our very early use cases where we proved out the use of artificial intelligence and deep analytics. So supply chain visibility, we've got something called the SVT, supply chain visibility tool, and it's a Power BI dashboard, but it's served by quite a complex set of algorithms and data sets behind the scenes that are hosted in our Nucleus platform, powered by Athena, which is our AI framework. So supply chain visibility tool allows the commercial teams and the banners to see stock levels in stores at a store level, and understand what needs replenishing or filling back up, combined with a very clear view of the fulfillment time for those products, for those SKUs from our manufacturing and sources across the globe. It gives them the ability to see where a container ship is in the Suez Canal, for example. So if a ship needs to be rerouted because there were issues earlier in this year for a variety of reasons, weather, there was the Houthi pirates, and military maneuvers. So they're able to see where, at a SKU level again, where the products are on the supply chain, on their journey, how long it's going to take for them to land until those products are on the crates in the stores or in the fulfillment centres in the UK or France or Poland. So that ability to see at the SKU level where your products are, be able to fulfill very quickly, doesn't give you quite just in time. It's not quite just in time manufacturing or delivery, but it's very close. It's about as real time as you can get when it comes to supply chain fulfillment. So artificial intelligence simply allows us to be more precise and more focused on those models that we've already got in place in many cases. So that's been a really big one for us. And there's other use cases like the common trading model, dynamic pricing I've touched on, that link into and draw upon all of that content, all of that data. And so we store all of that data in Nucleus. So we've got supply chain data, we've got SKU data, we've got seasonality, we've got meteorological data, we've got trend data. And the more you can bring all of this together, like a lot of the big analytics businesses out there, the more insights you can start to derive. And really, what's really cool is with some of the work our PhDs, our data scientists are doing, we're starting to see what we call serendipitous insights emerge. So we have very driven use cases, very clear use cases like dynamic pricing that we're working on. But we also start to see interesting insights that we haven't necessarily set out to find or establish, which is sort of based on unsupervised learning, but some of it's just simply bringing data together and seeing the trend data. We start to see correlations.
Chris, thank you for that really great overview of what Kingfisher is doing, and in terms of the foundational level that you've referred to, looking at how you're using AI to have productivity gains and also to improve the customer experience at the front end. But moving the conversation on, how is Kingfisher ensuring that AI is being implemented in a responsible, ethical, and trustworthy way?
Good question. And it's one of the things, along with cybersecurity and a few other domains, that keeps me awake genuinely. So we do it in a couple of ways. That there's a very formal way, a very structured way that we look at this. So how we look at bias in the models, how we are able to explain results or justify some of the results or recommendations that are being generated. We have ethical frameworks and governance under the term responsible AI, which we've developed internally, and we run all of our use cases and all of our work through. We have the PhDs, the data scientists, Mosen, Simon Jury, they all sit and share this model. And that extends out to the banners as well. So we have our group capability, Kingfisher, and then we have our individual banners, Screwfix, Casto, Brico, B&Q, and they're all experimenting with artificial intelligence, with analytics. Much of it is SaaS based off the shelf, so you can very, very quickly test things. Personally, you can spin up a ChatGPT codex with a Visual Studio, with a GitHub integration. You can very quickly start building vibe coding, as it's called, POCs, and in some cases pretty well established tools. But of course, when you do that, when you integrate these, if you take that example of Codex, Visual Studio, and GitHub, you've got all sorts of bias and decisions being made on servers in the whatever data center they're sitting in. They've been trained on data and models that you're unknowingly, or knowingly perhaps, most of the time unknowingly using as part of your POC. So if you decide to plug into Gemini and use the visual search, or if you want to use a large language model, Gemini 3, you don't know what it's been trained on. So we have a very formal framework, a formal team, formal governance process to review the outputs. It's a bit like A/B testing in many ways. When we A/B test ecom features and new releases, we do it with artificial intelligence as well. So we'll scale up a certain subset of customers to see how the algorithms and the results are landing. That's easier with things like conversational bots. It's slightly more difficult with other things like augmented reality. And then informally, we've got a lot of really tech savvy executives in the business, which I'm very, very lucky to have. It's both a challenge and a joy, because when you've got very tech savvy executives that don't grow up in technology, that can be very dangerous, but it's very good. So you've got people like John Muir, the CEO of Screwfix. He's a very technology savvy individual. He understands the power of artificial intelligence. He understands the risks and the threats. He's a hobbyist. He builds all sorts of interesting IoT and personal projects around technology at home. So he's very aware of that. Equally, Thierry, CEO of Kingfisher, he's an engineer by trade, by training. And so again, he's got a very analytical mind. He understands the benefits, the potential good, but also sees the risk, and he also sees the bad. So when you've got a good informal network surrounding, cushioning, if you like, a formal review process, you end up with actually a pretty good sense of what's right and what's not. And we try to encourage that with our organisation. We try to get people encouraged to innovate, but within a bounded context with rules, if you like.
Great, thank you. I guess tied to the use of AI in a responsible and ethical way, one of the big issues is the impact on jobs and on ways of working. What impact are you seeing on the ground with the implementation of an adoption of AI that's already taking place, Chris?
We've always taken and continue to take the point of view that artificial intelligence and related tools help the human being, help humans in doing their jobs. So if you take something like call centers, we strongly believe that not necessarily growing call centers is the right thing to do, but with our colleagues in the call centers that we have today, we want to make them better. We want to do things more efficiently. We want to give them the tools that enable them to scale. So as our customer base scales and the volume scale, they can scale with it using those tools. Equally with internal colleagues. So if you take HR processes, we've seen good success automating things like filtering and analyzing CVs. We've seen good success in finance with automating financial processes, but critically this frees up people's time to do more value add. So we don't really, as an organization, follow the whole, hundreds of people are going to be removed because of this new technology. I do think it enables us to scale in a much more efficient way. But that's a very, very different thing to, I think, a lot of the press, a lot of the stories currently doing the cycles in the last 12 to 24 months, where organizations take out huge numbers of people without really any evidence of how they've done it. It seems to be more on the regular cycle of layoffs that these very, very large technology organizations do every year or every couple of years. So, I was thinking about this a bit more broadly. You think about times throughout history where there's been technological advancements. You think about something like James Watt, and when he came up with this notion of horsepower to demonstrate the efficiency of the steam engine. What he was doing there is, aside from a very clever sort of marketing ploy around horsepower, which persists to today, amazing marketer, but really what he's doing there was demonstrating how a job changes. The fact that at the time, a mill needed to still mill the grain in a mill, instead of doing it via horses, you do it via steam. So it changes the job type. It changes what the person does. So you have to change. You've got to relearn. You've got to upskill yourself. You have to think about how work is changing. It doesn't necessarily take the person out. And again, it's just re-emphasizing, I suppose, we take that same perspective with both retail in the stores or the e-com journey online. So I think if we don't embrace it, it's not quite blockbuster levels of existential dread, but I think if you don't embrace it, you will be left behind, or you won't be able to compete quite at the level of those that do.
And I guess the other side of the coin is around jobs being created, new jobs emerging. Again, given how advanced Kingfisher is in terms of AI adoption, are you seeing new opportunities emerging from the use of this technology?
I think there's something interesting around prompt engineering and how our colleagues, both in store but also head office, can become more efficient in content creation, for example. So if you take something like our product images, sometimes videos, and the product descriptions that we have on our websites or in store, they can, with a very high level of accuracy and precision, now be generated relatively autonomously based on visual image recognition or multimodal data extraction by models. But it still requires good prompts in order to generate the right images, to generate the right marketing material. So I think it's creating a slightly different job in content creation and creativity and creative roles. In engineering, we're running an experiment with GitLab Duo, and there we're starting to see a similar sort of trend where engineers, instead of 100% coding things from memory or from Stack Overflow, they are starting to use co-pilots for things like unit testing, for validation, for new ideas. I don't know if you or your listeners will recognize this, but there's the sort of engineer or developer rubber duck tradition, which is, when I was a developer or programmer, I was always told that if you ever get stuck, I was given a yellow duck once by the managers. If you ever get stuck, talk to the duck, talk your problem through with the duck, and over time you'll probably figure out what the issue is. It's just about articulating and trying to verbalize the challenge you've got when you're very focused. And I think what we're seeing is, in a strange sort of way, co-pilots and large language models are starting to take the place of the yellow duck. So you can go and ask a large language model a question, or if you're stuck, it becomes almost like a co-pilot for you, hence the term co-pilot, I suppose. But again, it requires a different sort of thinking, a different way of working. So I would say we're more seeing existing roles evolve and mutate versus sort of net new roles that are emerging, aside from the expertise we need in data science and data. I guess just one other thing to say there very quickly would be, I think data has been important for many years, for decades, especially for telcos and other businesses. But I do think the role of data, especially given artificial intelligence and analytics, but the role of data and the data savviness of an individual needs to be leveled up now. So people coming into the market need to understand data in a different way, perhaps, to when it used to be the domain of a data domain expert or a SQL DBA or a product owner. You have to be data savvy now, I think, to really understand your products and your job role, especially in retail.
People talk about data being the oil for AI, and I think that is absolutely the case. So that's really interesting. What skills do you think people are going to need? I feel like you've kind of hinted at them, but let me ask you specifically, what skills are you looking for now in people having to work together with AI?
I was reading an article just this morning, actually, and it was essentially, I haven't read the full research paper, so this is more anecdotal, but the summary was largely brain activity is different for those that use large language models regularly versus not. And I think the example in the summary or the abstract was around the ability to write an essay and the brain activity that it sparks versus generating an essay using a prompt and simply reading it. Generated, not, it reduced the brain activity, but it actually focused the brain activity in different areas, but creative versus the memory. And so I think that sort of triggered a thought for me, really, is over time, as these tools proliferate, and I think they're here now, I think they're established, the type of skills you need from an individual starts to shift a little bit. It's less about memory and remembering things and being able to recall with a photographic memory content or concepts or knowledge. It's more about how you ask the question, how you prompt, how you utilize data and information that's at your fingertips. And it has been for years. Obviously, the internet's given us this wealth of information, and large language models and the GPTs of the world, they simply give us a much more easy user experience. But I think it probably does change what we're looking for when it comes to Kingfisher employees. We want that curiosity using these tools. We want the ability to go after data and aggregate content together, sift through it, curate it, and get to the real, critical question. That critical thinking, I think, will become even more important, I guess, is what I'm thinking. Less of the cramming, the traditional, academic memorization of formulas and concepts, because if that's just readily available, and over time, as that starts to be embedded more and more in devices, not just on phones, but it could be smart glasses, it could be embedded CPUs or chips, it could be smart contact lenses. As this information is just there and readily available, and you can recall it very, very quickly, I think the type of person we want and how people critically think shifts. And so we look for that, essentially we look for that curiosity as we're hiring, because it's not completely clear yet how it will impact, I think, human cognitive reasoning and how we operate in the future, especially with things like agentics on the horizon.
Yeah. We've talked about jobs, but a key part of virtually every economy are small and medium-sized businesses. I just wonder, how is Kingfisher supporting SMEs as they adopt AI through the ecosystem?
I think we're partnering with a number of technology organizations, some large, some small. So we use Google fairly extensively. We use Amazon, AWS, Microsoft, and then a number of smaller businesses. And what we're keen to do is, as the world of artificial intelligence, agentics in particular, so in the future world of everyone has their agent, and that agent, my personal shopper, my synthetic twin, is acting on my behalf, either in shopping or doing my tax returns or organizing a building project for me. As an organization, we need to think about how we enable those SMEs and those smaller businesses to also lean into and leverage the agentic future. And I think we've got probably a bigger part to play in that, and as one of the big leading retailers in the world, in Europe. How do we enable those SMEs? So one of the ways we do that very simply right now, which is not artificial intelligence, although we use AI to power some of the insights, is our marketplace. So DIY.com, B&Q, and our European banners like Casto, France and Casto, Poland, they have marketplaces where we sell third-party products from third-party merchants. So those merchants can sign up to our platform, and they can market their products and sell them using our very well-established and high-traffic websites like DIY.com. So we're enabling a lot of these merchants that you could consider them competitors in some ways, on some level, but we see it differently. We see it as an ecosystem of merchants and vendors, some relatively big, some individuals running out of their garage at home. We see leveraging and their product ranges and supporting them as a way to improve our range and our offer to our customers, which in turn helps us compete with the larger businesses around the globe. So I think some version of that, when it comes to agentics, as we embed agents into that workflow for merchants, is probably the way we need to go. And a lot of our partners tend to agree with us.
Chris, you've been working and leading on AI adoption. But if I were to lift and shift you from Kingfisher and put you in front of a board of another very large organization, whether it's in retail or manufacturing, financial services, we're talking about a large company board. Well, what advice would you give them? What should be their area of focus? What should they prioritize if they wanted to adopt AI?
It's another real big challenge for us. And one of the reasons I think we've made so much progress is partly what I alluded to earlier around the expertise we have around the business, not necessarily in technology, and the promotion of artificial intelligence and the opportunities of it by non-technology people. That's huge, because you've got advocates in the business, CEOs of leading retailers, advocating for use of the technology. So I think the first thing I would say is look at the use cases you've got today and look what you can improve using artificial intelligence. So AI is just one tool in the toolbox. You've got many things like improving your facet search for Boolean search, or traditional Boolean search, improving the facets, improving query performance time, getting your range right, getting your range availability optimized, looking at how you can leverage fulfillment centers, how you could leverage your stores as dark stores. You can think about the user experience, accessibility by design, so it's more accessible. There's so many things you can do that don't require artificial intelligence, and a lot of businesses simply haven't got right and are still working on. So first thing I would say is look at those lists of opportunities, and then figure out which one of them artificial intelligence works as an accelerator or a shot of steroids to that use case. So personalisation and recommenders are a good example of that. That's number one. So take the use cases, understand really where the benefits are around automation and efficiencies and improvements. And then for the internal, I would say for productivity, it's much more about experimentation. It's always really hard to see productivity gains on a P&L because, of course, you're freeing up people's time to do more value-add work, but the people still exist. They're still there. So unless you're automating volume-based contracts or something else, I think internally you want to experiment much, much more. And then the other piece I would say is one of the reasons we've been so successful with our endeavors is you just got to hire the right people, the right team, and you've got to just let them go. You've got to have governance, you've got to have frameworks, and you've got to have really clear use cases, business cases, make sure you've got return on investment, you've got all the right financial indicators around a use case, but you also just need to trust that if you get some really clever, really motivated people to come and do things differently, you've got to let them just get on with that, because otherwise if you try to constrain them, you'll never get to where you need to be. Some people might say first mover advantage is the best, others might say second mover, wait to see what happens. But for us, it was a combination of all of those things. It was, let's get a team, get them moving, get them running at some really interesting use cases. Let's go after these commercial opportunities, and then we'll check in using our governance every quarter. So I don't think you treat it any differently from any other innovation stream or accelerator, and you definitely don't treat it any differently to any other investment. You have to have a combination of all those things. It's a very Swiss answer, but I do think that combination is what's worked for us.
Chris, thank you so much for sharing these insights and being so very open about what Kingfisher is doing and its AI adoption, and sharing, but not just the strategic view, but also taking our listeners down into understanding how you've gone about putting some of these pieces in place. So yes, let me just say thank you so much for joining me on the AI Adoption Podcast.
Thanks, Ashley. It's been a pleasure. Really good conversation.